Well, 6:33. Well,
Okay.
well, as well, guess we'll get started.
Okay.
No need to kind of wait around, I guess. Welcome everyone to the October 27th, 2021 Housing Committee meeting for Community Board 8. I am the co-chair, Ed Hartzog, along with my other co-chair, Greg Morris. We welcome you to this edition. We are very happy to have with us this evening Charles McNally. He is the Director of External Affairs at New York University's Furman Center. For those of you who don't know about the Furman Center, they do a lot of research on real estate and those issues. And the reason, and I'll let him talk more about the Furman Center, but just so you know why Greg and I are having this topic this month, for those of you who may have seen it, I believe last Friday or a week or so ago, there was an article in the New York Times entitled "Rising Rents Fuel Inflation, Posing Trouble for the Fed." And there was talk in that article of rental prices going up at 16.4%, which those of you who are secretly micro and macroeconomic mavens know how sticky those are with respect to inflation. And then on top of that, we found another article here locally in the Gothamist talking specifically about the Upper East Side, and the article was entitled "Desperate NYC Tenants Are Waging Bidding Wars as Rental Demand Surges." And that was, if you want to look for it online while we're having the meeting on the Gothamist, we hope you do pay attention to Charles, of course, but if you want to see the article, it was from October 15th. The article just talks about bidding wars that I haven't seen or heard about since I first moved to the city over 20 plus years ago. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over. We are going to turn it over to Charles to tell us a little bit about, you know, what's happening here. Charles, what's going on? Please.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much, Ed, and thank you for the invitation to speak with everyone here tonight at Community Board 8. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Oh, I cannot start screen share. Okay, there we go. And thank you for the introduction. My name is Charles McNally. I usually go by Charlie. I'll say I'm the Director of External Affairs for the New York University Furman Center. And as Ed mentioned, for over 25 years, we have worked to advance research and debate on housing and urban policy in New York City and across the country. We are a joint research institute of the New York University School of Law and NYU's Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. So we are interdisciplinary. Our faculty include lawyers, but also legal scholars, but also economists, urban planners, I myself am none of those things. I'm our communications guru, so I hope there aren't too many micro and macro mavens out there. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the research today, but yeah, just really happy to join you to talk about housing and why it matters for Community Board 8 in Manhattan. So here's what I'm going to go over quickly. I'll walk through some of the news. And then I want to talk through why housing affordability matters. That might seem obvious. If you're a renter, it matters, in a very real way for your monthly expenses. But I want to cover, some of the other reasons it might matter for, various populations and demographic groups in New York City. Then I'm going to walk through some of the data that's available through our neighborhood data profiles. For the Manhattan 8 Community District. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the research says about land use regulation and new construction and what it means for rents. And then I'm going to close just with what I think are some really striking findings that were published not long ago by the New York City Department, by the Department of City Planning, New York City's Department of City Planning, about what's happened with net housing gains or losses in neighborhoods across the city. The other thing I'll mention is that, before getting into some of these headlines, I'm going to recap the two pieces that Ed mentioned. This is a very volatile period in New York City's housing markets. The pandemic was obviously an extremely volatile period. The post-pandemic, we're still not, I think, at a new equilibrium yet. Things are volatile. And in a lot of ways, the data hasn't really caught up yet. I mean, we know, we have a rough sense of what's going on based on, some of the listing sites and, some of the data sources that are more immediately available. But we're not going to have a really firm grounding on this until, I think there's more time lagged data available. The Housing and Vacancy Survey has been in the field. The results of that will be published in 2022. That kind of stuff will give us a much better handle on exactly what's going on in this very volatile and somewhat unpredictable period. So I don't pretend to have all the answers about this, but I'm going to walk through some of what we have. So I'll breeze over this because, Ed, did you have a question?
No, I was going to say, folks, I forgot to mention, as we're going to take questions at the end of the presentation. So I know we'll have a lot of questions, but we'll wait till Charles goes through all the whole presentation before we take questions. All yours, Charles.
Sure, absolutely. Yes, so I'll breeze through this. Ed talked about this. These are the headlines that he mentioned that I think prompted him to reach out to us at the Furman Center. And, this kind of thing has been happening across the country. It happens in very different types of markets too. There are housing affordability crises in, places like Detroit, places like Buffalo, even without the strong demand that New York City has, for slightly different reasons. But this is not uncommon, housing costs rising and rising faster than income. So, why does housing affordability matter, right? Like if you're a renter, at least renewal time, housing affordability matters. When you cut that rent check every month, what the size of it dictates how much you have left over, how much discretionary income you have left over. But housing affordability matters for more than that, right? It matters a lot for housing stability. We have a homelessness crisis in New York City. It's probably second only to Los Angeles in terms of the per capita rates of homelessness in the country. There are, depending on what metric you use, between 60 and 70,000 homeless New Yorkers in shelters and on the streets. And homelessness is often considered in isolation from, housing affordability, but it's really part of, housing affordability is a big part of the picture of homelessness. A recent Zillow study showed that when the rent to income ratio exceeds 32%, you see sharply increasing rates of homelessness. So when people are paying, more, when the median rent exceeds 32% of median income, rates of homelessness shoot up. A 2020 report from the U.S. Government Accountability Office found that for every $100 increase in median rent, it's correlated with a 9% increase in homelessness. So if you're concerned about homelessness, you should be taking housing affordability seriously. Why else does housing affordability matter? There's the issue of choice, right? High housing costs concentrate lower income families in certain neighborhoods of the city. That perpetuates the sort of legacy of segregation and racial discrimination that the Fair Housing Act has attempted to address. There's a fundamental sort of philosophy behind the Fair Housing Act. People should be able to choose where to live, regardless of their age, race, ethnicity, religion, sex, familial status, right? Those Fair Housing Act protections. But high housing costs lock a lot of New Yorkers out of being able to choose where to live, being able to choose where to move. And then also, sometimes it prevents them from being able to choose to stay. If you're talking about a gentrifying neighborhood, you should have, a choice of where to move, and you should be able to choose to stay in your neighborhood if you've lived there for a long time. We've released research that finds that subsidized housing in New York City is more likely to be located in high poverty neighborhoods. And there's a number of reasons behind this, right? Land costs are cheaper, so you sort of get more bang for your buck, particularly if you're building subsidized housing with public funds, taxpayer funds. You can build more units where land costs are lower. There's maybe less organized opposition to subsidized housing construction in lower income neighborhoods. And, to be fair, there's a very real need for investment in these lower income neighborhoods. There's often poor housing quality. These neighborhoods have been disinvested. So, there are real reasons to invest in these neighborhoods, but a lot of times the market dynamics and the housing affordability, the price of land in higher rent neighborhoods prevents subsidized housing from, being located there. It prevents folks with tenant-based subsidies like housing choice vouchers or city FEPS vouchers from affording units in lower poverty neighborhoods. So housing affordability really impacts choice. Housing affordability impacts health. There's some very obvious connections between sort of housing quality and health. People think of things like lead paint hazards or air pollution. But there's more direct connections as well, right? There's been research that shows that rent-burdened low-income households spend less money on things like nutrition and childcare, right? Matthew Desmond, who wrote the book Evicted, had a very, a now iconic phrase, the rent eats first, right? That he heard when he was doing his ethnographic research. So, families spend less on nutrition, less on healthcare, and that is shown to have an impact on child health outcomes. The dean of the Wagner School and our faculty director, whose name is Sherry Gleed and Ingrid Gould-Ellen, they showed higher incidence of anxiety and depression among unsubsidized households. So that's households without a voucher or not living in a public housing development or a tax credit subsidized development. There was higher incidence of depression among low-income children in gentrifying neighborhoods. That suggests that the housing instability that's caused by a lack of affordability really, has a direct mental health impact on these children. There are housing affordability and access to good schools has a market effect on education. We did research that showed that children in NYCHA buildings in gentrifying neighborhoods showed improvements on standardized tests. Low-income households with higher housing cost burdens spend less on child enrichment activities. And in general, the sort of sum of this is an impact on opportunity, right? Where you live, what neighborhood you live in, has an enormous impact on the sort of the outcomes in your life. And there was a very, very robust study about 5 years ago by Raj Chetty at Harvard that showed, with experimental findings showing that children who move to a low poverty neighborhood at a young age, more likely to attend college, higher lifetime earnings, less likely to become single parents. These are really powerful social science results and they suggest that, housing affordability and the ability to for low-income households to live in a neighborhood, a lower poverty neighborhood with access to good schools, less crime, is just a major benefit for children in those households. So that's a little bit about, and I should say also, I alluded to this with choice, but all of these outcomes, health, education, opportunity, economic earning potential, the way these opportunities are distributed has major implications for fair housing and racial equity. The groups that have access to high poverty neighborhoods, or the groups that are confined to high poverty neighborhoods, those fall very clearly along racial lines. And we'll see that a little as we look at the data in the Upper East Side, right? So the Furman Center, I'm going to drop in, can I drop in the chat? The Furman Center has, one of the main data resources we make available, if I can get back to Zoom or chat maybe. Can I chat while I'm sharing my screen? Maybe not. We have neighborhood data profiles. If you go to furmancenter.org/neighborhoods, you can pull the neighborhood data profile for any community district in the city. And here is the demographic breakdown of the Upper East Side by race and ethnicity for 2019. So there were an estimated roughly 215,000 or so people living in the Upper East Side. And you can see the breakdowns here for the four major census demographic groups: Asian, Hispanic, Black, and white. These demographics, as I'm sure you're aware, do not match citywide demographics. Let me look here. So citywide, 31% of the population is white, 29% is Hispanic, 22% is Black, and 14% is Asian American Pacific Islander. So you can see the Black and Hispanic groups very underrepresented compared to their citywide numbers, whereas white households are very overrepresented. This is what household income distribution and the poverty rate looks like in the Upper East Side. So in 2019, households making between 100,000 and 250,000 comprise the largest share of households in the Upper East Side. The median household income in 2019 was 136,560, which is about 93% above the citywide median of 70,590. The poverty rate you can see here, 5.8%, dramatic, less than half the citywide poverty rate of 16%. So, this isn't news to you folks. You live in the Upper East Side. It's, it's the poverty rate is quite low. The income is quite high. This is exactly the kind of high opportunity neighborhood that if we care about those, those outcomes that I talked about earlier, we should be trying to make more inclusive and more accessible to a wide range of New Yorkers. This is what's happened with gross rent over time on the Upper East Side compared to citywide. And again, all these figures are available at furmancenter.org/neighborhoods. You can pull these all, and there's a table that has all the detailed numbers, going back to, I think, in some cases, the 2000 census. So you can see here, the real median gross rent has increased from about just over $2,000 in 2006 to $2,400 in 2019. And, to think about how that has impacted rent burdens, in 2019, 19% of renter households in the Upper East Side were severely rent burdened, meaning they spend more than 50% of their gross income on rent. So that's 1 out of every 5 renter households on the Upper East Side is spending more than half their income towards monthly rent. Very high number. In 2019, just over 13% of the rental units on the Upper East Side were considered affordable for a household earning 80% of the area median income. That's typically the eligibility threshold for federal rental assistance if you're earning at or below 80%. of area median income, you're eligible for public housing, eligible for Section 8 vouchers. And only 13% of rentals were affordable to folks at that income level. I hate this slide because I feel like I've broken a rule here, showing a map of Manhattan that's not oriented north-south. It hurts my eyes to look at, but I encourage everyone to go to our website, and you can look at this yourself. In addition to our neighborhood data profiles, we have a data resource called the Subsidized Housing Database, which maps every subsidized building in New York City. I shouldn't say every, there are some small caveats to that. It maps, roughly 12,000 subsidized buildings in New York City, including all of the major programs: public housing, HUD subsidized multifamily buildings, Mitchell-Lama, low-income housing tax credit buildings, 421A tax abatements, all these programs that are used to subsidize housing in New York City. The major ones are all included here. So this is a map of where those subsidized properties on the Upper East Side are located. I had to orient it this way just so the slide was visible. It was just too small if I oriented it vertically. But to give you a sense of what these numbers look like, if you exclude those two on Roosevelt Island, there are 84 developments here with just under 10,000 subsidized units. Again, to go back to our demographics, just over 200,000 folks live on the Upper East Side. So there's less than 10,000 or just under 10,000 affordable units, subsidized units. But if you filter the list and look, and you can do this in our core data platform, if there are actually only, if you look at the list of these 84, which were built over the last 20 years, there have only been 27 properties built over the last 20 years. And it's just under 2,000 units built over the last 20 years of subsidized affordable housing in the Upper East Side. That's a quick snapshot of what our data shows about the Upper East Side, and I encourage everyone to explore that more. I want to talk a little bit about land use, about what the research says on land use and construction and rent, and what that shows. There's some sort of micro 101 findings about land use and construction and rent. We know that geographic limitations, natural barriers to expansion, like mountains or rivers, maybe if you're an 11-mile long, 3-mile wide island, you have some geographic barriers on your on the land that's available to develop. This research shows empirically that does in fact limit new construction and drive up housing costs. There's a number of studies that show that restrictive land use constrains supply and increases rent. This is micro 101 stuff. If you have less housing supply, you're going to pay higher rents. And there's been a consensus for a long time that that's true at the metropolitan level, right? That at the citywide level or at a metro area level, more supply equals lower housing costs. There's been more debate about what the hyper local impact of construction is. In other words, what does new construction do in a specific neighborhood as opposed to citywide? And I'm going to get to that later. But for now, for the moment, just this research shows that at the metro area, new construction relieves pressure on rents. And then finally, some really interesting research recently from an academic, a political scientist at Boston University, who found that it's not the regulations, it's not necessarily the land use regulations themselves that are causing the restrictions on new supply. It's the politics associated with them and the review processes that they create. The benefits of building more housing are diffuse, right? It's going to, in the aggregate, if we build a lot more housing at the metropolitan level, and that includes the 5 boroughs and Westchester and Nassau and North Jersey, we're going to see a gradual relieving of pressure on rents. That's a pretty diffuse benefit. But the negative externalities of new construction those are quite concentrated. If you're living next to a construction site, you are probably, not happy. The noise, the congestion, the strain on infrastructure, and land use review processes and restrictions give a lot of opportunities for those stakeholders that experience those negative benefits to really slow down the process and object to building more. So Catherine Levine Einstein wrote this book, Neighborhood Defenders, about how these objections play out in land use review processes. She looked at Massachusetts, but I think if you read her findings, they're very applicable to New York City as well. If we create land use processes where the people who shoulder the negative impacts of new development are very, very well represented and very part of the discussion, but the people who benefit from them are absent, that's going to be a big constraint on building building enough housing to meet demand. So that's at a citywide level. But as I said, there's been much more academic debate about what happens at the hyper-local level. A lot of folks feel that, new construction, new buildings go up, that exacerbates the affordability crisis. These are luxury developments, Billionaires Row, the Hudson Yards. These are really high-end units with really expensive rents or sale prices. A lot of them are condos, ownership units. How is that going to alleviate the affordability crisis? In fact, might it not make it worse when you're, attracting these high net worth individuals into a neighborhood? So that's a legitimate argument, but I think in the last couple of years, there's been some research that really looks at it with some academic rigor and shows that it's not just at the citywide or regional level that new construction helps affordability. It's at the hyper-local level as well. You can see some of these bullets here. Rents generally fall within 100 to 150 meters of new developments or are lower than they would have been otherwise. And housing affordability improves in lower and middle income areas as well. Notably, there is this sort of amenity effect that does exist when new buildings go up. New restaurants, new services, new goods and services do follow that new construction, and that can increase rents, but it's more than offset by the new supply that comes online to take pressure off of housing costs. So one of our own doctoral fellows did a study about this, Xiaodi Li. She found that for every 10% increase in the housing stock, rents decrease 1%. Sale prices decrease within 500 feet of buildings. A researcher at the Upjohn Institute, Evan Mast, did a study of 12 metro areas in New York with the similar findings. New market rate construction makes housing more available and reduces rents in low and middle income areas, even in the short run, as there's a game of sort of, I think the analogy he draws is musical chairs, right? People move into these newly built higher end units and free up opportunities throughout the middle and lower segments of the market. So that's what the research shows on new construction and the impact on rent. And I want to close with this, which is a map that was released, I believe, in February of this year from New York City's Department of City Planning. And what it shows here is the dark blue is the areas that added the most housing units per acre. And the orange are the areas that lost housing units per acre. You might be thinking as you hear me, well, we've built a lot on the Upper East Side. I see the cranes and my kids go to school on the Upper East Side. So I see them too. There is new construction happening. But you can't just consider new construction. You also have to consider demolitions and alterations where folks buy adjacent units and combine them. And when you consider demolitions and alterations, the picture looks like this. This is also from that same Department of City Planning report. You can see Manhattan 8 here at the very end of, it's the second, had the second largest net loss of units. And you can see the construction bar is this light green here. The construction bar was kind of middle of the pack in terms of new units being added through construction. But here, when you subtract demolitions and demolitions in the orange and alterations where people are combining units in the blue, there's actually a net loss of units over the last 10 years on the Upper East Side. So a net loss of units, and you all know what has happened to the Upper East Side. I don't want to say it's gained in popularity because it was always, I think, popular, and I don't think it's a recent phenomenon that it's been popular. But the 2020 census numbers just came out, and New York City as a whole gained 600,000 residents. That's like the population of Miami being added to New York City over the last 10 years. And on the Upper East Side, there was a net loss of housing units. So when you have a booming, growing city and a net loss of housing units in one of the most desirable neighborhoods, that is a recipe for extreme cost growth. And particularly with the post-pandemic rebound, I think the vacancy rate probably jumped in those early days of the pandemic, but now I think we're seeing people come back to New York City. The households that had the resources to leave are now all coming back at the same time. I think that's also probably driving those spikes, that rapid growth in rents and prices, and the Upper East Side, as well as the city and the metropolitan area as a whole, just haven't built the housing to accommodate that new demand, and haven't built the subsidized housing that's always going to be necessary to house low-income households. I should say, we're not at the Furman Center free market evangelist to the degree that we think that the market can solve these problems. Folks at the bottom end of the income spectrum are always going to need subsidized affordable housing in order to be able to access the opportunities that neighborhoods like the Upper East Side present. So that is my, how'd I do? 35-minute presentation, 30-minute presentation. I'm happy to take questions. I'm happy to stop screen sharing and let's see, and chat in some plugs to some of those data resources I gave. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to respond.
We will open it up for questions. I think everybody here is pretty familiar with the raise hand button on the reactions at the bottom of your screen. I'm just going to ask the sort of standing question, and I see Rita's already got her hand up. One of our most knowledgeable members. I'm going to ask a question that's I always ask, and land cost as a percentage of housing construction. That's one. I'm just such a pain about that one. Can you give any clarity on that, Charlie? On what I know it varies from project to project, but what is the general basic cost of land as an overall cost of building?
So the cost of land is a huge contributor to how high construction costs are in New York City. I will say we don't. I wish we had more recent research on this. We did some more detailed work on this, but at this point, it was back in 2005. Which is a little stale to be for me to present on tonight, or for me to have at my fingertips. I just joined in 2018, but that research I mentioned about the geographic limitations and how that how that impacts new construction. That is land costs, and land costs in Manhattan are as high as they are probably anywhere in the country. So, how does that play out? It definitely, it means that when housing can be built, it sort of has to be targeted. When market rate housing is built, it has to be targeted towards that high end of the income spectrum to make it profitable, to make it financially feasible if it's market rate. And it means that if the city is trying to build subsidized housing and not build it on city-owned land, it means there's an enormous amount of public subsidy required in order to make the deal work. And for, I think, the last two administrations that have been focused on a very ambitious production target in terms of units built, I think that's a very hard trade-off to make, to spend the amount of money necessary to buy a parcel on the Upper East Side or in Soho, because you're going to get so many fewer units subsidized affordable units for that cost, than you would in a lower cost neighborhood.
Would you say 40% is ballpark?
Oh, geez. You know what?
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, I should be able to answer this, but I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
I don't know it off the top of my head, and I don't want to give you a wrong number. But it is a significant driver for sure.
Okay, that would be great if you had anything on that, because obviously that's a fixed cost, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
what you pay for the land is baked in.
Absolutely. Okay. I can ask I can definitely follow up with that. So our actual researchers can probably quote that off the top of our head. So I'm happy to follow up with them.
All right, we're going to turn it over to one of the smartest members of our committee, Rita Popper. She has her hand up. So,
sure,
Rita.
Housing is my thing. Mike, first of all, thank you very much for coming and presenting. And I have a question. The question is, if we continue doing exactly as you presented, and we see the charts going up, what do we have to look forward to as far as the demographics in our population? Children, are we going to be able to educate them? The reason I ask is that yesterday I circulated an article that used to be that 38% of children in shelters didn't go to school. Now it's 75%. And so we never break the cycle. And if we can, what is being done to make this more equitable, giving people chances? In other words, if you can't live on the Upper East Side, you can't live in New York, but your work is here, and you've got kids, and you're in a shelter. What do you see the future is if we keep going like this?
Yeah. So, if the trends continue, I think the research is clear. If rents, if New York continues to be a place where people want to live, and more people are moving to, and the metropolitan area as a whole, and I'm not just talking about the Upper East Side, but I mean the whole city and even our suburbs as well. If we don't build enough housing to accommodate that demand, housing costs are just going to continue to escalate, and that does affect the number of New Yorkers who are homeless, for sure. It impacts opportunity. I do think that there's also a very important component that is outside the community board's purview, which is federal funding, demand side interventions for this stuff. I talk a lot about the supply side because that's where local land use, local control, the theory of local control and local land use decisions at the local level, we have more input and control over how our land is used than we do over things like the budget for, federal housing choice vouchers. But adequate federal resources, both for new construction on that supply side and for demand side interventions, like an expanded voucher program. Those are really important to avoiding the kind of outcomes where we just have, continued increases in the homeless population, continued widening of the inequalities and disparities that have, I think, been present in New York and so many other cities across the country for so long.
This is just a part two of this question. We know how important essential workers were, especially during this pandemic. Are we forcing them out of the city? And what do we do if there's another pandemic? I mean, are we forcing them into shelters? Where should they live? You see where I'm going. I'm trying to get what we need and what we offer and what we can sustain. We don't have any sustainability here. I mean, it's not everybody earns. and I'm going to just give you one example. Roosevelt Island, building number 8. And the only reason I use it is because I remember the fees. Building number 8, the AMI went up to 185%. And the landlord, the owner, got tax abatements for offering affordable housing. Now, I can remember, because I'm pretty old, that all of Roosevelt Island, every single building on Roosevelt Island was a Mitchell-Lama co-op or a Mitchell-Lama rental. It was supposed to be that way forever. However, obviously got lost. I'm scared. I am scared of where we are going to get people who are going to take care of our elderly, people who are going to take care of people with disabilities. Where will they live? Are they in shelters?
Yeah, you raise a number of really, good, I think, good and valid points about the challenges that we face in trying to provide affordable housing for essential workers, for seniors, for all these populations. The expiration of regulatory agreements is something that policymakers should be focused on. I think there are significant efforts to preserve existing affordable housing. In fact, I think that the last 2 mayors, in terms of their housing goals, have been 60-40 in terms of preservation versus the production of new affordable housing. But there are places where the market incentives are so strong that it becomes really difficult to put together a financing deal that's attractive enough to an owner or an operator to stay in a subsidized affordable program, or to residents too. Some of those Mitchell-Lama co-ops you mentioned, it's shareholder and resident votes that took them out and went market rate. So we need a pipeline of construction to replace those developments where there's expiring affordability restrictions. I think there's a huge need for more subsidized senior housing. I think there's a real need for universal voucher assistance, which probably makes most sense at the federal level, although there's been some talk about it at the state as well. There's other safety net interventions that you can imagine, particularly post-pandemic. Our faculty have written about and called for a standing emergency rental assistance program similar to unemployment insurance, right? As the pandemic hit and we lost 10 million jobs, unemployment kicked in. It was not perfect by any means, and I think the bureaucracy sort of groaned under the weight of all those unemployment applications coming in. But the infrastructure was there, and I think that was a critical lifeline to so many households that lost income during the pandemic. You can contrast that with the emergency rental assistance, which was done on more of a disaster recovery basis. They had to stand up that program from scratch, and as a result, there's been just endless bureaucratic headaches. There's been delays in distributing the money. There's been landlords are pulling their hair out. The tenants are pulling their hair out. And that's a result of the fact that that's not a standing program, right? That's something we stood up in response to COVID. I think there's a really strong case for making emergency rental assistance a permanent fixture of the social safety net, something that sort of exists and helps millions of households even under normal economic circumstances. And then if there's a crisis like the pandemic or a natural disaster or any of the other crises that we're likely to face, is there ready to expand and prevent those households from falling into homelessness. And the last thing I'll say is that homelessness, it's absolutely true that, more and more families, more and more households with employment income are becoming homeless. It's a travesty. That's a labor market issue. as you know, which is a little bit outside of the Furman Center's wheelhouse in terms of research. But you know, of course, I think there are labor market interventions that you can think of that would help alleviate the pressure on the income side of the spectrum.
I just wanted, very last thing is that I work with homeless families in right over the Queensboro Bridge, and they live at the Sleep Inn, which is a really crappy hotel. All of the parents work. What it is that they can't afford the rent. So it's not as if they're in a shelter because they couldn't work, or they have an addiction, or, I mean, I'm sure that there are those people too. But all the families, I met them all work.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it's absolutely right. And this, I mean, you know, only there's a statistic that the national housing advocates often quote that only 1 out of every 4 households that's income eligible for rental assistance receives it, right? And that's very different than other social safety net spending, like temporary assistance to needy families, like SNAP, Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, Medicaid, you know, food, healthcare, income. There's sort of a basic floor, and if you're income eligible, you receive it. That's not the way we do housing assistance for some reason. Only 1 out of every 4 eligible families receives federal housing assistance. So there are limits to what we can do locally about these issues. The issues that we have control over at the neighborhood level are our land use decisions. You know, how open we are to more housing in general, how aggressively we push for subsidized affordable housing. You know, those are the local steps we can take to make housing more affordable.
Do you ever do a study this is my very last question. You ever do a study if we don't have affordable housing, what it will mean to the city? No,
I don't know. I don't know if we've ever looked at the doomsday scenario where there's no affordable, where there's no where all the affordable housing disappears tomorrow. I can tell you it would not be good. I mean, the other topic we haven't talked about that it's not generally considered sort of subsidized affordable housing, but is rent regulation. And that's a whole sort of another methodological and research can of worms, but that's half the rental housing stock in New York. So we haven't looked at that in particular, but we do know that subsidized affordable housing is key to all those outcomes that I mentioned: opportunity, choice, health, education. You know, it's all directly impacted by the availability of affordable housing.
You may have talked yourself into another appearance here, Charlie. Yeah, we may be bringing you back for that one. That sounds like a good. That sounds like you know, you might have them packed in for that one. Not that we don't have a good turnout now. Thank you, Rita. And I would like to say thanks to Peggy Price, who suggested we reach out to the Furman Center to bring you in here. So thanks to Peggy. I see she's here tonight. Marco Tamayo is queued up next. Marco, it's all yours.
Thank you, Ed. Let me ask.
We lost you there for a second, Marco, I think.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I got it now.
Oh, okay. Let me answer the question that you asked about what is the proportion of the cost of the land. I'm going to answer this one. The lot on 78th Street and First Avenue is approximately 170,000 square feet. They are selling for $90 million, approximately $532 per square feet. And the cost of construction of affordable housing, it should be between $800 to $1,200. Now, right now, probably I will go even to even higher, because the inflation that we have is untenable. I'm doing something minor construction, and I found that the prices, they double and they triple. So the labor is the same. So we're talking about the cost, if maintain the old cost, Approximately for the land is between 35 to 40%, and the rest is the construction cost. And this is a very good question because the problem, your question is because the Upper East Side doesn't have empty lots. Maybe the East Side, the Bronx, maybe the other neighborhoods, the declining neighborhoods, they have empty lots. So the cost of the construction over there of the land is very cheap. However, there is a profound lack of understanding that the NYCHA developments are huge, huge space that we can just only with simple changes, for instance, change the density from middle density to high density, we can save the city 400 and 300 million of dollars, and we can still build in affordable housing. The problem is you still need money to build affordable housing. Now, I think with this answer, let me put this way. I agree. The issue of housing is supply and demand. The higher is the supply, the higher is the demand, the more expensive is the housing. And the poor quality is the housing stock. Very simple same formula. It's not the MAI, it's nothing. It's very simple. If you have enough supply of housing, the quality of housing will be improved notably. In our neighborhood, it's different. Let me give you another example so you will understand the statistic that you presented to us. A project on 86 and York Avenue, he asked for the mandatory inclusionary housing, so have an extra 2 FAR, 20 feet high. They demolished 33 affordable units, and they built 34 affordable units. So the net gain is 1. So what kind of benefits we have right there? So this is why I think the zoning and development committee is working in that direction to try to preserve affordable housing with different kind of policies, because we need actually to work in that direction. Because once we start stopping this way to demolish and do not replace, and to replace one affordable housing equals millions of dollars. So every time that you see 40, 30 affordable dwelling units that has been demolished, that's what the city, they need the money to build this amount of this quantity of housing. So to give you a little bit more emphasis in the supply and demand, at the beginning of the pandemic period, according with HPD, there were 1.1 million of applicants for affordable units. And the Blasio administration, I don't know if it's true, but let's go assume that it's true. They said they built 185,000 in the period of 8 years. So basically what they produce is probably less than 20%. 80% is the demand that exists in the city. And that's clearly this number, and all the decision makers, they are blind. They don't want to listen to that. The only thing they say and they advertising, I'm going to build affordable housing. Yeah, maybe they can build 2, 3, 400, 300, but the deficit is in the hundreds of thousands of affordable units. So as long as the demand is too high, always we can have a poor quality of housing stock. Simple. And then the more expensive, because the uncontrollable inflation, the less chance we have to build. Simple stuff. It's very clear. This is economics at 101, and that's what I learned, by the way. So, in the study that we try to present to the city planning, I did a deeper analysis of housing. I found that those buildings, especially in the corridor of the hospitals, that the community board they approve, they provide welfare to all the hospitals, they really impact seriously in the housing stock. They rent and they buy affordable units for the residents and for the doctors and for all of them. So those affordable units become middle or high income apartments. So not only we provide floor area to build more beds. Oh, by the way, I'm not against jobs, by the way. Somebody's gonna say, oh, he doesn't like to create jobs. I love to create jobs. But the point is, when you have large amount of beds, you have large amount of the staffs and the students. And those students, they don't want to come by train or by car because it's impossible to travel on the Upper East Side. Why? Because everybody's crowded at that time. And that is the mess that exists on the hospital corridor, on traffic.
Marco,
So,
there's some other hands up. So if you have a question, go ahead. I just want to make sure other folks get a chance to jump in.
I just want to make my comments. Exactly, I'm trying to pinpoint the issues that he addressed. Mr. McNally, he provides to us a spectrum of the whole city. And what I presented to him is a spectrum of the Upper East Side. Since you don't want that I should continue, okay, I'm going to stop right there. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to give some other folks a chance to weigh in. Thanks, Marco. Sorry for interrupting. I do appreciate you giving other folks time. I see Anthony's hand is up. Anthony, want to jump in?
Well, I was going to say, does Charlie have any thoughts on?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. My apologies. Ed, sorry about that. Charlie, please.
Sorry, was there a question in there?
Nah, I don't know if there was a question in there, but I didn't know if you had any thoughts on, on any of that.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I will say is that, construction, this does look very different in different neighborhoods, right? And what kind of solutions we need, that is, that varies by neighborhoods too. And there's a lot of tough trade-offs that policymakers need to make with these things. The one thing I'll say about inclusionary zoning, if there's a zoning variance, there's a report actually by the Manhattan Institute that looks at the inclusionary zoning, the results of the inclusionary zoning program so far, and finds that it's mainly been used, again, I mentioned this, but subsidized, it's mainly been used in lower income, lower cost neighborhoods. That's not how the program is really supposed to work. The whole point of the inclusionary zoning program is that you use the really high market rate rents in places like the Upper East Side, in places like Soho. You use those rents to sort of off budget subsidize, affordable units. And thus far, it hasn't really worked that way. I think there are still opportunities, land use and construction has a very long time horizon. So, that policy, I believe, was passed in 2014, maybe 2015, not that long ago as far as these things go in terms of, the pipeline of financing to closing to construction to lease up. Those things take a long time. But I think there are opportunities to leverage some of the higher cost neighborhoods like the Upper East Side, like Soho, to build more affordable housing for sure.
Maybe before we kick it over to Anthony, who is co-chair of our Zoning and Development Committee, maybe that's something that we can talk about as a joint meeting, maybe, Greg.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we could bring you back for something like that, a more robust discussion. But Anthony, you're up.
Okay. Teeing or coming off of, bouncing off of what you were just saying about inclusionary zoning, Charles, why hasn't there been more? If it's so attractive a program, why hasn't it happened?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think there are a lot of factors behind it. Again, I think the politics and economics of local land use sort of both exacerbate the tendency to concentrate, subsidized housing in, lower income neighborhoods. I think that's, I think that's part of the explanation. It's probably not the whole explanation. That Manhattan Institute report I mentioned was by a guy named Eric Kober, who spent years at the Department of City Planning. I think that's worth a read if you're trying to understand where, how, and why inclusionary zoning has fallen short of the possibilities.
Because sort of a second question that grows again out of your answer there is, I sort of understand market forces, local market forces. I'm not quite sure if I understand local politics, because I think as a community, and I know I'm speaking all myself for not only the community board, or not only this committee and my committee, but also the entire Upper East Side. Having said that, I think that we all would welcome more affordable rental housing in our district. And what we have gotten, and this is, when you get this local, everything is anecdotal, and we get luxury condo after luxury condo with apartments ranging in size from 2,500 square feet up. And they're all built as of right. They are all built to satisfy what appears to be an ever increasing demand for ever more expensive apartments. So, having said that, I was particularly interested, and I'm sorry because I'm going to go on too long, and I apologize in advance. There was a study you cited by Enstein from 2019 about the politics of land use review is more to blame for limited housing supply than regulations like the zoning resolution. And if I don't quite understand what the lack of political will, if that's what it is. And if you could point me really at the study, I'd love to read it, because it just, it's not counterintuitive at all. I just don't understand what those political forces are that are preventing affordable housing.
Yeah, so I have better than a study. It's a whole book. It's called Neighborhood Defenders, and okay. I would definitely recommend it. It's Catherine Levine Einstein is the researcher who published it. I will not pretend, that I have the level of expertise and knowledge of local land use politics that you all do. So I really don't want to, speak about, speak out of turn about exactly how different developments and deals and affordable housing has played out on the Upper East Side. I think, my read on her research is just that, opponents stand to lose a lot, and the folks that stand to gain are diverse and don't even know, are diffuse and don't even know that they necessarily stand to gain. So it's just so when a developer is weighing whether to build as of right versus whether to propose a zoning variance and say, oh, I want to build 10 stories higher and also include 100 affordable units, their read on what the community's reaction to that zoning variance is going to influence whether or not they decide to propose it and to try to get it through ULURP, right? And if they decide that they're going to be hit with lawsuits about the environmental review and have to that there's going to be organized, well-funded opposition to what they're proposing, and they can build a profitable development as of right, they're probably going to go as of right? Avoid the headache. So that's my read on it. But again, I'm not necessarily speaking about that in any specific context related to the Upper East Side. That's my general read of the research and the political dynamics at play. Just based on reading about them, not experiencing them as you all have.
And because I think we have a reasonably aggressive attitude toward more housing in our community, and ironically, sort of in our local news today, although it even made the Post. Extel, which over 2 years ago now, demolished the entire block front of First Avenue between 79th and 80th Street with the intention of building some kind of rental housing. And in a meeting that actually it was a joint meeting between housing and zoning and development, Extel or Gary Barnett, in fact, himself said that he thought that it was certainly going to be a residential building and it would certainly then have to have some affordable units in it. Didn't say how many, that's okay. And that it might even have a school that we put in, that they try and get some kind of real neighborhood amenity in it. That building, which was announced this week, is going to be medical offices and an outpatient facility for a hospital for special surgery. And it's going to be built completely as of right. And there isn't anything any of us can do about it except jump up and down and stamp our feet. But it isn't any housing units. So there is a net loss of another 40 or 50 units of what was 2 years ago affordable housing. And the people who live there almost undoubtedly have had to leave the neighborhood altogether. And so it's not like we don't want to have more housing here. And I think all of us, this is a statement, not a question, are a little tired of being accused of NIMBYism on that score, when we have no control over virtually any of the housing, no say in any of the housing or any of the construction in our district. And then I have one more question, which is a real question and a general question. Is New York, or do you perceive, or does this research show New York to be different from other cities in the country? And because I found in almost every way, I'm an architect, and almost everything I do, New York is different. New York has 10 times more streetlights than any other city in America. New York has 10 times the school children of any school district in the nation. And so the question is, how different are we? And what does that mean for housing?
Yeah. So sorry to keep muting. There's chaos behind me. So trying to spare you all. So I think you raised a number of good points. I mean, you look at that chart that I showed. In terms of new construction, right, Upper East Side was middle of the pack. It's demolitions and alterations that are responsible for the net loss, even in the face of, I won't say like dramatic new construction, but moderate new construction, right? And I'm sure no one is advocating for demolitions or mega mansions and alterations. So I think that point is very well taken. In general, I think opposition, and again, I think in general, opposition to new construction has intensified in New York. I think people look at developments like Hudson Yards. I think even owners or like immediately adjacent neighbors of construction have long sort of had economic reasons or quality of life reasons to oppose new construction. What you see in New York more recently, I think, is housing advocates and low-income renters feeling like new construction is going to exacerbate and not relieve the housing crisis. That's happened citywide, but I think that's happened in a lot of neighborhoods and developments. But I tend to agree with you. I don't think that's probably really driving that dynamic isn't really driving what's happening on the Upper East Side. So what I could say is that I think there's more appreciation among, I think this is a conversation that you've heard in the mayor's race about, where to locate new construction and, whether to upzone areas like Soho, NoHo, that's an active conversation right now, depending on how it plays out. There's a rezoning in Gowanus, which is a higher income neighborhood. Depending on how those things play out, I think, you could see something similar, happen in other higher income neighborhoods. But I think that's a really, I think that's a legitimate point that and then in terms of, the sort of New York exceptionalism point, I don't know how generalizable Catherine's research is to New York City. I think it's definitely worth understanding how these, land use battles play out at the local level. But I think the real thing with New York City's scale is to think about what's going on in our suburbs, and particularly Westchester and Nassau County, right? New York City, for all the talk of, I want to express more than one thing at once. So we really haven't been, at a citywide level, we really haven't been building enough housing. We've built less housing over the last 50 years than we did from 1920 to 1930. From 1970 to 2020, we built less housing than we did from 1920 to 1930. Now, in the 70s and 80s, the population was falling, so it's a little bit more understandable that construction would be minimal during that time period. But since, I would say, at least the early 90s, if not the late 80s, the population has been growing. The population has been growing rapidly, and we just have not built enough housing to accommodate it. And it's not, as I say that, New York is, unlike most other metro areas, only 15% of the 5 boroughs is zoned single family detached lots, right? And a lot of that is in Staten Island. Where is the release valve for this pressure? That's where housing isn't being built. It's in Westchester County. It's in Nassau County. North Jersey actually does a pretty good job. Jersey City, I think now is like the second most dense place in the country. North Jersey does a good job where there's really been almost no supply added is parts of Westchester, large parts of Westchester, and large parts of Nassau County. We've written about that. Again, I hesitate to get too into the weeds there because this is a community board meeting that's about local land use issues. So there's limited avenues that this body has to affect housing development in Westchester and Nassau County. So,
but I think it's a very good point that it's not just, or that it isn't even mostly a community board 8 problem, that it's a citywide problem, and really in a way a regional problem. I mean,
metro, absolutely.
Yeah, a metro problem. And I think that and then I just have one comment on the upzoning. Somehow the upzone plans never actually provide more affordable housing, just more expensive housing. And there are certain limits, I think, to density in Manhattan that we should begin to really take seriously. And I think I'm definitely down on the Soho upzoning, and I'm kind of mixed on Gowanus, even though other people have said no, hate it. But I think that we have an opportunity to think about the city as a whole city, and that might include higher density on Staten Island, and that might include higher density in some of the lower density areas in Brooklyn and Queens, in order to increase the overall housing stock. And if we could get someone, ourselves maybe, to spend the money on better mass transit, more reliable mass transit, we might be able to actually make it possible for somebody to live in Queens and work in Manhattan, which is hard to do now.
I live in Queens and work in Manhattan, I will say.
All right, but you know what I mean. All right, fine. All right, I take it back. Brooklyn, or Staten Island actually is maybe the best example.
Right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I do think, I think if there's neighborhood rezoning, that then subjects the entire neighborhood to MI, or the entire rezoned area to MIH requirements. So then any as of right construction will, will be done with MIH. So I think that's, one reason to consider those upzonings. The other thing I would point to is that research that I mentioned from the Upjohn Institute by Evan Mast, which is just how even constructing market rate housing at the high end of the spectrum does ripple out throughout the different segments of the housing market. People move into that higher end housing. They free up housing opportunities in the next tier down, and that that works its way through the system faster than you might think. The other thing is, in the absence, just one more thing I'll say.
Go ahead,
in the absence of new construction, that's when you really see these alterations, right? People buying, there's no luxury condo. People buy a brownstone that was, divided between 2 and 3 families. They tear down all the walls. They put in a giant kitchen. It's now a single home. If there's no new building to absorb that demand, you see people buying, flipping existing homes. Then existing housing gets more expensive over time instead of getting, as happens in a healthy market where there's enough new supply, instead of getting less expensive over time. So even market rate construction, even though it doesn't feel like it's helping, it does help. Although you also need really robust, subsidized, affordable as well.
Oh, okay.
Let's actually. I want to give some other folks an opportunity here.
I know that. I just wanted to say one thing.
Yeah.
What you just said finally sort of clicked, that even luxury condos help the rental market. I mean, that's what that study seems to show.
Yeah, I would suggest reading the whole study, but yeah.
Ed, did you want to jump in?
Yeah. But, well, to build on what you and Anthony and Charlie, you're talking about, with the 79th Street, First Avenue building. And I remember that meeting. I think we had 300 people there. Just to take away from that, Charlie, it seems what we've been trying to do on the Housing Committee in the last 7 years is having a conversation. It's just having that opportunity, because again, that's a lost opportunity, right? That's a lost opportunity we had for housing. We had Gary Burnett here. It seems to me that it behooves all of us in some way to try to engage, notwithstanding our, divergent opinions, left, right, center, anywhere in between, but trying in some way to get, because if you're not having that conversation, you're not having good policy if you're not hearing all the voices, right? Because you're not able to make the kind of good policy decisions that you need to make, because you only have one side of it. Does that sound reasonable in some way, in your estimation, Charlie?
Are you asking me? I'm sorry. Yeah. Certainly, I think, I think you want community engagement, you want community buy-in, and including the community in the discussions about, what housing looks like and what growth looks like for New York City and its neighborhoods is, I think a really important part of the process for sure.
Okay.
Marco, go ahead.
Yep.
Thank you. I think you raised so many issues that some of them I disagree with you, or most of the issues I agree with you. Let me start saying this one. My professor at Hunter, when I was doing my master's degree in urban planning, it was a long time ago. He was saying that New York City was the leading in policies in housing and everything. So everything was born in New York City. Why? Because we face serious problems, serious demand of housing. Being said that, I think Anthony, he raised the issue of density. Density is the key, all of that. Density if we don't have control, and that will be we have to be connected with the application that we're doing, the 210 feet high limit for all the buildings and unprotected avenues. And I think it's a very smart idea. And that party will connect with NoHo. I was surprised what they did in NoHo. It looks like almost a socialist neighborhood rather than a capitalist, which is, I like it so much, by the way. They really did a very good job. As a matter of fact, they will impact probably in our decisions or in our recommendations in the application for the 210 feet high. Very good plan. And about the Westchester, I think I know very well the real estate. I have properties over there, so I know very well. I don't think it's a smart idea. It's a suburb area, and you know very well. Without no car, you go nowhere. If you try to increase density in that part, you are in serious trouble. And that is why in most of the parts of Queens, they don't want to increase that because they don't want to lose the parking space because the distance to the mass transportation. And Anthony mentioned very well in that part too. And when you're talking about demo, yes, demo is a big serious problem. And I have to connect with the project on 3rd Avenue and 83rd Street. This guy demolished 40 affordable dwelling units and to build 86 luxury housing, which basically is 20% of the density. And that we have to also do. We have to put as a good policy that the developer has to increase the density so they can produce luxury housing, middle housing, and low-income housing. But in this case, it caught me even my attention in this development. They are included affordable housing in 86 affordable dwelling units. I think if I know wrong, probably what they're using in that project is the old vouchers, the housing voucher that was built already in the Bronx. It was built in the declining area, and that probably they're using that. How is possible that we can allow our community to have all the advantage? Because the biggest problem is the height of the building. There is no limit over there. So he can go to 449 feet tall. And so they produce just luxury housing. And that is the biggest concern. I think the 210 feet application that we have in the city planning, or we try to file, I think this is the most important decision that the community will ever did. And that's, I'm working in that direction, helping the applicant, in this case, Mr. Tuck. So the issue is, yes, community engagement. The only thing community engagement we can get it is if we can have a limited height of the buildings. So they are forced to go for ULR or variances, and then the community can say something. The development on First Avenue and 79th Street is as a regular development. They can do whatever they want as long as it's in compliance with the zoning. So if we have an application with 210, then we can have more chances. I don't want to continue more. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Charlie, do you want to respond to anything you heard there? Feel free.
I just don't feel qualified to get into the details of specific developments and proposals.
Fair.
Got it.
Rita?
And yeah, Rita, we saw your hand up. If you want to jump in, feel free. I know we're running tight on time, but feel free.
Yeah.
Charlie, again, thank you. I still would like, all the studies we see is from way back, yesterday, last year. Where are we going? How are we going to get there? Because if you don't do the planning part, we're going to end up in trouble. And that's what I was hoping that an institution like the Furman would be looking at, because somebody's got, it's not that the answers are that elusive. We're not in a barrel by ourselves. And just to give you a reason why they just opened senior residence in my neighborhood on 94th Street and 2nd Avenue. This is not Millionaires Row. On the ground floor, the monthly rent is $13,500 a month. So, I mean, obviously, I'm never going to live there, but so
Yeah.
we're
So,
we're using things. We're using words. We're using senior housing. We're using medical. Everything. What it is that the developers have made what the land is worth. It wasn't worth that before. So thank you.
yeah, at the Furman Center, we try to, everything is data driven. So we shy away from predictions, and we try to ground everything in numbers, so we can, we can speak to evidence. We can build our, build our conversations on research and evidence. But I do have something that's a little bit more forward looking from my colleagues at the Wagner School of Public Service. And I just put a link in the chat right here. It was just released in the last week. It's called NYC 2025. And it is a series of proposals. What does a stronger, fairer, more equitable New York City look like? Our faculty contributed to this series. So if you're interested in something more forward-looking as opposed to something more analytical and backward-looking, please take a look at that.
Thank you.
That seems to be a great note to end the time with Charlie on. Charlie, I don't think we can thank you enough for this informative, interesting, dynamic sort of topic. There's a lot more to talk about. And to Ed's point from earlier, I think it would certainly be worthwhile to bring you back to the table if you were willing on additional topics as things unfold for us. Is that fair, Ed?
Yeah, I think so. And Charlie, whatever, I know Greg and I will do minutes for this, but any of the things that you referred to, just, any of that information that, we talked on the phone, we just starved for information. We, data, not to turn it into a graduate school seminar, but, the
Absolutely.
lawyers and all of us, data and evidence driven, good policy.
Absolutely. I will follow up with a list of links, and I really appreciate all your time here tonight and your engaged questions. And look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thanks. Take care.
Yeah, thank you very much. Anyone else? Marco?
Thank you again, Charles, for tonight's presentation. The only thing I forgot two points. One of the issues that we never mentioned is the buyouts. In the Upper East Side, the buyout is $2 million. So that is outrageous. Those people that they claim to be poor at the end of 30 or 40 years become millionaires. And I think it's wrong. This has to stop. That money should go to HPD to build more affordable housing, not to the pockets of these people that they claim to be poor and then become, at the end of their lives, millionaires. And this is one point. The other point that I would like to raise is, I didn't write down. I think I forgot. And thank you so much.
Okay, fair enough. I'm sure when Charlie comes back, we can talk about buyouts. I'm sure that we can talk more about that. Yep. Any thoughts from the floor, folks?
Old business, new business.
Yeah. Is that Rebecca Dangor? We can't see her, but
go ahead, Rebecca.
CDR.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt new business or old business. I was going to make a motion to adjourn, but I'm happy to hold off if you want to finish that.
I think we got a thumbs up and a second. So if you want to make your motion, I think it's okay.
All right, I'll make a motion to adjourn. Thanks so much. It was very interesting.
All right, seconds. I think we've got a thumbs up already, so I think that's good to go. By the way, before we conclude, I think it's worth saying our co-chair Barbara Chalky's passing, difficult and challenging for all of us. The work of this committee will continue, and we'll keep her spirit and her values and her comments and her thoughts and her wisdom in mind as we go from here. Ed, I'll leave the floor to you to close us up.
Thanks, Greg. I echo that. And of course, everybody tune in on the 10th next month for our meeting then. And I think that's great. And I see Sandrea is here, and just in time, Sandrea, for us to wrap up, and all good. And thanks everybody, and we'll see you next month. Oh, quick plug for next month. We have some folks coming talking about what Charlie's talking about today and some of the stuff that Anthony's talking about. We have four, I think, really good attorneys coming in talking about affordability, equitability on the front lines. These folks are in the trenches doing the battles of the things that Charlie's talking about, all of us are talking about tonight. So it's going to be an exciting meeting. We don't have a night for it because our regular meeting night, as you know, is the fourth Wednesday. And I believe there's some kind of thing on a fourth Thursday in next month that is going to have people prioritizing that. So perhaps we'll find an earlier night next month. Keep tuned, stay tuned. It'll be a different night than our regular meeting night. Hi, Sandrea, nice to see your face here with us. And we're looking forward to that. And Greg and I will keep you posted. So again, thanks all of you for coming.
And maybe we'll partner up with zoning at some point soon too.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you.